Welcome to the Anastasia podcast. Welcome everyone again to Anastasia's podcast, and I'm Anastasia. This is the podcast. Today we're going to be talking to Noah Frere, and he's an astrophysicist and an astrologer, and we had a very lengthy and in-depth conversation about Persephone and the myth of Persephone. And then at the end, we really delved into what it would mean to have Persephone in different signs in your chart. So I hope you enjoy this talk. For any links, please look down below, and I'll see you guys soon.
This came through my school account. When I was in grad school, I got you to use their Zoom.
Fair enough. All right. Well, welcome, Noah, to the podcast. First time. How are you doing today? We've already chatted for a little bit before. We had some technical difficulties, but we sorted it.
I'm feeling great. How are you?
I'm feeling really good. How has this Mercury ingress Gemini has been for you? Are you feeling more at home?
I actually haven't noticed. I think I've been so focused on preparing material about Persephone, but it's I've been like looking at a lot of different things and trying to bring them all together into a single document. So
fair enough.
I guess that's a Mercury and Gemini kind of activity. And Gemini is my rising sign, so I feel good about it. I definitely feel focused.
For sure.
There's no problems associated with my research today, so I guess I feel good about it.
Looking forward to it. But before we get into Persephone, I did want to ask you about your life a little bit and how you got into, because you're an astrophysicist and you're also an astrologer. So how did those find each other, and how did you get into astrophysics first? And then how did astrology find you?
Okay. It started with a gift of a telescope about a dozen years ago, Jupiter cycle ago. And I just, as I use the telescope more and joined some astronomy clubs in the neighborhood, I became pretty obsessed with astronomy. And this was well before I knew anything about astrology other than some signs. And so finally, I was kind of tired of reading articles about it all the time online. I was like, if I'm going to spend all this time reading astronomy articles, I might as well go back to school, right? So I did. I went back to school. And astronomy these days is most of the time astrophysics. So that's not entirely true. There are astronomy professions that aren't physics, but a lot of it is physics. So I went back to school for physics. I was 40. And very slowly started learning pre-calculus and so on and so forth until I finally went to grad school and got a master's. Now, it was technically a physics degree, but I did manage to find a mentor who gave me a project in asteroid research, asteroids and meteorites. So I say it's an astrophysics degree, but technically I didn't go to an astrophysics school. So it was like physics, but the astronomy kind of part of physics. As I was in grad school is when I became increasingly drawn towards astrology. I did a little bit of astrology before grad school, and I started growing in interest. But it wasn't really until grad school that it got real heavy, which is kind of bad timing, because when you're in graduate school, you really need to focus on your studies. And astrology pulled me away from the physics a little bit, but I'm fine with that because now I'm an astrologer. I did manage to get a master's degree, which was difficult and hard-earned, and it was great. I had the best mentor, and the thing that really, there's defining moments in life, right? The thing that really clinched astrology as something that was important to me on a very high level was a serendipity, wherein well after I started my research. It was already set what I was doing. I was doing it. It was studying a random asteroid, from my perspective, named Vesta, and how that asteroid relates to meteorites found on Earth. And you compare the spectra to each other, and you make a bunch of conclusions. So like a year after I started studying Vesta, I opened my chart and threw the asteroids in there, and I noticed I had Vesta rising. And I was just, that was the moment where I was like, how perfect is it that this huge portion of my life, 8 years of school, in the middle of my life, has culminated in the one asteroid that's rising in my chart. So yeah, that's all I need to say about
Synchronicity.
that. Yeah.
For sure. I love that you use the word serendipity, and I've noticed you use it in your writing as well for synchronicity. And I love that word to describe these moments in our life that lead us and kind of guide us into what we're meant to be doing, really. And I think it's really brave of you to have gone and I'm going to change my profession in my 40s. And then actually, I think this change of my profession is more of a path towards something bigger, something else that I'm doing. So that's a beautiful story. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
And it led us to the asteroids. So you said you were fascinated by asteroids, and did you say comets as well and things like that when you were studying?
No, not comets, because they're kind of different.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to be fascinated by comets, but I can only handle so much in my brain at one time. So
that's very fair.
Yeah, I limited it to asteroids.
We came here to talk about Persephone today. And since we've mentioned asteroids, I thought we'll just dive into the story of her and the myth of her and what does it mean in our charts. Because Persephone is not commonly used by modern day astrology. It's still quite new for us. Is it because it's a new asteroid, or is it because we just haven't really put it in the charts yet?
I think there's a couple of reasons. One is I don't actually know how new she is. I haven't, in preparing for this conversation today, I meant to look into the astronomy of Persephone, and I didn't at all. I was so focused on the mythology and stuff. And I really wanted to at one point. I was like, oh my God, I gotta look into the astronomy. And I didn't do it, which is too bad. I guess it'll have to be another
next
conversation.
Time. We'll do astronomy of it.
But she's so small. She's not a huge asteroid, and there are so many asteroids. So why would we choose Persephone, who's a somewhat random asteroid, as opposed to some other random asteroid to take seriously as an astrologer? And the answer is we wouldn't if we were most astrologers. Like there's no reason to. Unless a particular asteroid calls to you for some reason, then there's really no reason to get involved. I mean, plenty of astrologers don't use the asteroids at all, really. So like, we don't need to add another random one. I personally was drawn to her when I noticed she was playing an important role in someone I know. We'll call this person Jane to protect her anonymity. Jane literally was playing out the role of Persephone. And that's when I got curious. I was like, who is this Persephone? Where's Persephone in her? I knew Persephone was an asteroid. And so I looked it up and I was like, who stole her away from her family? And well, that had to be Pluto, right? Or Hades. So I looked up where, I just wanted to see what that looked like in the chart. And I also wanted to look at who was actually being Pluto in her life. Unfortunately, I couldn't get a birth time for that person. That hopefully will be corrected at some point, but it might not be able to be corrected. So that's how it started. It was just like a personally relevant thing for me. And then I started throwing it in charts because I found her a very interesting archetype. And I found her different enough from other archetypes that she deserved a spot in the chart for my purposes. But in no way do I think it's necessary to use Persephone ever if you're an astrologer. It's only if she kind of calls to you, right?
Right. There's a relevance to certain asteroids and comets and stars and certain points in the charts where we don't really need to look at that. But it's interesting that you've noticed it in a life situation at first and then correlated it to the myth and then opened the charts. Is that how it was?
Yeah.
And then you saw, oh, actually, it is significant here.
Yeah, it was so long ago that I first brought that chart up with our person. What did we call her? Kate? Have I changed her
Jane.
name already? Jane?
Kate, Jane Kate.
Any four-letter
middle name.
any four-letter word will do.
Yeah, fair enough.
So Kate, Jane. I don't remember now. It was so long ago, and I didn't look into it before. Like I haven't looked at it like over a year. But I have been. I started doing more where I'm asking my clients and other people questions that are Persephone relevant, and then getting their charts and starting to make notes and put together a whole thing, which is a very long process. The more data you have, the better our delineations will be. So I have some interesting stories. Like, you want to hear a story?
Yes, please. This is what
Okay,
it's all about, stories.
So yeah, so I don't even, I should pull up her chart. I'm gonna pull up her chart real quick just so I can see it while I talk about this person.
No, that's fine. It does help to see the chart even when we do think about stories and myth, because it is a language that we learn. And when you're looking at a chart, it's like reading a book or reading a story or reading something unfolds in front of you. So yeah, it's definitely helpful. Oh, you got stuck. Did I get stuck for you?
Okay. I'm also gonna make
we're back. Sorry, what you were gonna say?
Oh, nothing, sorry.
I was just gonna say that we just had some more technical difficulties. I suppose that's what happens when two mercurial people try to do a podcast.
I guess so.
I guess so.
Yeah,
Who knows?
How are you mercurial again?
I've got Moon in Gemini, and to me, and also Jupiter in Virgo with conjunct Vesta. So I don't know. I don't actually know what Vesta is doing there. That's why I was curious. That's why I thought maybe we can talk about that next time. But I also have Sun in Sagittarius. So my Sun rules Jupiter in Virgo, and then I have that Moon in Gemini as well. So it's definitely very mercurial. I feel it.
How close is your Vesta and Mercury?
It's not my Vesta in Mercury. It's my Vesta conjunct Jupiter in Virgo.
Oh, okay.
So they're about 1 degree away.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I believe my Vesta is in 13 degrees Virgo and Jupiter is 12 degrees Virgo.
12 and 13. And where is your Mercury?
Yeah, my Mercury is in Sagittarius.
Oh, okay. So you have Mercury ruling Jupiter.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I'm definitely, and it rules, I suppose, my Jupiter in Virgo in the 8th. So yeah. It's definitely something I'm working on.
Okay.
But I think it's interesting to have a placement in both Gemini and Virgo and try and navigate them throughout life, because my Gemini, I feel like, is a little bit more something that is impulsive. I mean, because it's the moon, it's something that comes through naturally as well, though. But because it comes from naturally, because it's impulsive, I still have to work on it and refine it in order to navigate it properly and use it in the world. With my Jupiter in Virgo, I think I'm still figuring it out, but I feel like that's really what stops me from jumping into things. And in one way, it's like a blessing and a curse, because having the Sun in Sagittarius, you do tend to get a little bit more impulsive. You do get a little bit more, I suppose, especially when it's not developed. And my Sun in Sagittarius is on 1 degree, so it's like 0 degrees. So it's, there's different debates on that. But one is that the fact that if you have a planet in the early degrees, it's something that you're going to be developing throughout your life. It's something that you're really unaware on how to use, especially when it comes to evolutionary astrology. They talk about that too. So I don't know how much I believe in that, but I definitely feel that Jupiter in Virgo stops my sun and Sag sometimes from jumping into things. And on the other hand, it's too much of a perfectionist where it doesn't just let me, like with things like video, it's like just doesn't just let me do something. It's like, oh, it has to be done right and it has to be done properly. And there has to be a pattern and there has to be, but anyway, we digress.
To continue the digression, so your sun's in the first degree, so at 0 degrees of a fire sign.
Yeah.
So is mine.
Yes. Oh, that's
Mine's
right.
at 0
Aries.
degrees Aries. Yeah, so we both
That's
have
right.
that. And then if we're going to go with like the first sign is Aries thing, I'm not only at the beginning of a sign, I'm at the beginning of all of the signs. So I'm like the baby, the very baby of the zodiac. Like when I first learned that I was at the first degree of the first sign, I thought of myself as I just came out of the God consciousness. I like went through a whole universe and now I'm doing it again. And I kind of like that idea, actually. It feels very fresh and new. And I get to now spend a few trillion years figuring out what life is about.
I like that way of thinking too, in the sense that it makes sense that you went out and you keep changing. I suppose not keep changing, but you keep evolving and learning about who you are and figuring out what it is that your profession is in this life. It makes sense. And with Aries sun, it's that, oh, okay, like I'm ready to start something new. I'm ready to start something new. You're not afraid of new beginnings. And it is interesting.
No, I love
Wish we
new
could see the whole
beginnings.
process of all the lifetimes, but unfortunately we don't have that luxury.
Some people might. The Buddha did.
Some people might. That's true. I guess suppose if we sit under the Bodhisattva tree all the time.
Which I've been there. I've been to that tree.
Oh, you have?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, amazing. How does that feel? What was that like?
It's great. It feels like you're witnessing part of history, an important part of history.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and also the first degree is brand new energy of that sign. So it might not understand it and it's not wise in the ways of the sign, but it's like the baby wisdom. It has this precognitive or maybe precognitive kind of wisdom that isn't necessarily rational. And so it's very intuitive. And I love that idea also. So the first degree is really exciting because you're in this brand new place. Cat.
Oh, cute.
Yeah, it's okay, kitty. I left the door open so the Wi-Fi would travel in here better. And now I have cats visiting me.
Oh, nice. How many do you have? 2?
3.
Oh, lovely.
But only one of them is loud. And she's the one who just came in.
That's all right.
So I don't know. Maybe that's enough about the first degree of a sign.
No, that is very fascinating. I think it's interesting, especially for somebody who's just starting out and learning astrology as well. But even for me, like it's good for me to relook at these things with a different perspective and a different eye. But I know that you really want to get into Persephone, and I really want to get into that too. And I've got some questions about Persephone too once you tell us the story. So where we stopped was that you've experienced Persephone, I suppose, or saw Persephone in your own life, and you wanted to see how that relates to astrology. So what is the myth of Persephone for somebody who's not familiar with it at all?
There are different forms of it, of course, because back in the old days, the cultures were very dispersed, right? And so the myths would travel from one culture to another and change. Before we get on with the main mythology that most people associate with Persephone, I'd like to mention this alternative form. I can't remember where I heard it from, but I think it's really interesting, and I'd like to learn more about it, to this alternative form of Persephone's myth, which states that she chose to guide, as I recall it, she saw all these ghosts or lost souls wandering around the earth who didn't know where to go. And she knew where they could go, so she led them to the underworld of her own volition, therefore becoming a psychopomp like Mercury, and there was no abduction. So this is supposedly, if this has any truth, is an old myth that predates the Hellenistic times. And it puts a different spin on Persephone than what we normally think of, which is what
culturally, especially.
Yeah. So
because it kind of takes away, sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just going to say it kind of takes away completely from the way that we view Persephone, and it takes away from that root theme of what Persephone is in our minds in the modern world.
Yeah, totally. It adds complexity to our interpretation of Persephone. Adds another layer. It gives her a sort of internal strength. Like, she's not a victim in this mythology. She is the one in control of her life. But I don't want to focus on that story because I don't know anything about it other than what I just said. So let's get into her usual mythology, which is she is the daughter of Demeter, otherwise known as Ceres, depending on if you're using the Greek or the Latin. And she was much beloved by her mother. So she is this beloved daughter figure. And she was in the field, and Hades, who's also known as Pluto, thought she was amazing. And actually, you know, it's funny when you read the actual, some of the first words about Persephone, she's described as pale-armed and slender-ankled. No, it was white-armed. White, I mean, I guess it depends on how it's translated, but as I read, it was white-armed and slender-ankled, which is interesting. Like, why did they use those descriptors? But it's probably, I assumed it related to her being beautiful. That was my assumption.
Right. So the paleness of her skin was beautiful, or you don't think it related to the fragility of who she was?
Maybe that's even better. I like that. Yes, I like that a lot. And it's not like pale is beautiful, like tan is beautiful, black is beautiful, you know. Who wants to marry a pale person who doesn't get any sun? Some people do, some people don't, but
well, not in our day and age, hopefully nobody does.
Yeah, pale, there's something, when you see someone really pale, it makes you wonder, are they getting enough sun? Do they have some kind of thing, or is that just the way they are? Like, I don't know. Some people look unnaturally pale to me. Like, pale skin's fine, cool.
Yeah.
But some people look like unhealthily pale. And so if that's what they were getting at, then I like your interpretation.
You start to worry about how much time they actually spend outside. Well, in Japan and in China, paleness is beautiful. It's still considered beautiful. It's changing. I suppose it's changing now with the little different communities that they have of different beauty standards. So there's, of course, Japanese goth, there's the Harajuku girls who are very, very tan and they've got white under eyes. You've probably seen that too. But mostly traditionally, and in a lot of places in Japan, still paleness is considered beautiful. So I don't know if that was in the Hellenistic time as well, or it's something like, because if that's how they looked at paleness, maybe that's what they meant, beauty, maybe they meant fragility. But the reason why it's beautiful in Japan, it's because if you're working outside and you're doing agriculture, you're going to get tan. But if you're an aristocrat and you don't have to work outside, you don't have to go harvest rice or do any other those things or do gardening, then you are considered more, I suppose, desirable.
Right.
That
makes a lot of sense.
I mean, of course, that's an interesting way to look at beauty, but it's just a tradition. We can't judge it. It's just what it is.
Right. And actually, there's a whole subculture of Japan. I saw like a 15-minute video once where they dressed and put makeup on that made them look black, I believe. Are you familiar with this subculture? And they listen to hip hop and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know how black you meant, but like very, very
like black,
tan.
black.
That's how to,
I mean,
I
like black culture, like black American culture. Like
I'm gonna look
hip-hop,
into that.
R&B. I saw a whole video on it. It was like, I didn't make a point to memorize all the details, but I feel like that's what I saw about a year ago. Something to look into. And if I'm misrepresenting, then I apologize.
No, that's all right. I'm sure you're not offending anyone right now, but I think the Harajuku girls is very, very similar to what you're describing. But maybe there's a different subculture to that that's evolved as well. Because I haven't lived there for 10 years, so
Right.
I wouldn't, I'm not in that culture. I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
But if anybody knows, do send me an email or something. I would love to know more. Or if you find any more information that is weirdly fascinating, for sure.
Weirdly fascinating.
But
So
just the way.
Oh, you go on.
Oh, I'm just saying the way that it went from thinking that pale beauty is beautiful to putting blackface on and listening to hip hop music. Like that's two completely different polar opposites of one another. So
it is indeed. And
Japan is a
then
weird place.
This whole talk about Persephone. Oh, Japan. Yes. I hope I don't offend anyone when I say Japan is a weird place. I've never been there, but it's just such a wacky. You got so much love for Japan. Like, who doesn't want to go spend years in Japan? Can't wait to go to Japan. Okay, including bonsai. All right, anyways, so Persephone and beauty, there's even this myth where she has this is a digression, but she has a beauty box. And was it, can't remember the name of the person who went down. It's a very famous myth. Someone was sent down to go retrieve. Oh, it was, she had to do like some very difficult labors. Aphrodite sent her to do these difficult tasks that she never thought she would accomplish. Oh, you'll recognize this. Psyche, yeah. So Psyche had to go down to the underworld and get the beauty box that belonged to Persephone, I believe.
Right.
Bring it back to the non-underworld.
Aphrodite, right.
Yeah, and so there's another, like, that's the only Greek myth that I know of. I'm not an expert in Greek myths, but it's the only one that I know of where a beauty box is mentioned, and it belongs to Persephone. So more information there about Persephone and beauty. But she's obviously beautiful. Like, that's why Pluto wanted to have her as his wife. So back to the myth. How did Pluto get Persephone as his wife? He did not ask her. Instead, he took her. So that's just a thing, right? It's terrible. It's called abduction. It's one of the worst things ever in the world, which is why her poor mom was distraught for years, or at least a long time. I don't know how long. It depends on the myth and which version you're reading. But she was not a happy camper. And to make it worse, Zeus, Persephone's dad, said it was okay. That's not cool. So what is so he comes up out of this chasm in the earth, takes her away and brings her back down to the underworld, and just grows plants there again, so nobody can see that he took her. Nobody knew that he took her except for one character. I think it was Helios, because the sun god can see everything. But it took a long time for Demeter, Persephone's mom, to figure that out. So finally, after being so sad that she couldn't grow, so Demeter she's kind of a version of Mother Earth. She's the goddess of grain and agriculture, and grows the crops for the humans to eat. So when she stopped growing the crops because she was too sad, that caused a problem for Zeus, because these people were Zeus's people too. And he's like, Demeter, just start growing your crops again. It's not good. I'm going to lose all my people. And she's like, too bad. I need my daughter back. So finally he relents, and he sends Mercury down there to Pluto to bargain for Persephone. And Pluto agrees, but depending on which story you're reading, he gives her some pomegranate seed or seeds, and she eats some, not knowing that it was binding her to Pluto or Hades. So she goes back up to her mom. She's reunited. There's joy. The crops grow again, and it's springtime. And then after either a third of a year or half a year, she has to go back down to Hades and live with him and be the queen of the underworld. So she represents the joyfulness of spring and new life, and the dying away of the plants and going into the winter season. So Ceres, Persephone together kind of explain the seasons.
Mm-hmm. Do you, yeah. Sorry, you were gonna say?
I'm saying that's just like the most simple part of the myth. Now, there's many more places we're going to go with Persephone today.
Mm-hmm.
That's just kind of like the starting point.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think that, because normally we hear that Ceres or Ceres is connected to the dying of the plants and the flowers and going into winter, and then represents the spring as well. Do you feel like Persephone represents that too? Or do you think one represents one season or one part of seasons, and then Persephone maybe represents spring or which one is it? Yeah.
So I like that question, because when you're looking at an astrology chart and you're using Ceres and Persephone, you don't want to conflate them and say, oh, they both mean spring and winter, because then like they mean the same thing. And then you're getting two different messages, like one's in Aries, one's in Pisces. Which one are you? Is your spring Arian or is it Piscean? So you have to differentiate then. And so I did think about that quite a bit. And one of the things I came up with is Ceres is the overworld seasons in general, and more so summer, and more so nurturing. She's like the nurturing asteroid. So she's the fully grown plants. Whereas Persephone is that the first growth of spring. That doesn't nurture anyone. It's just they're starting to come out of the ground. She's the retrieval of whatever she represents, which we'll get into later, from the underworld. And so there's this joyousness associated with her. And then when she goes away, she goes into the underworld. And so this gets complicated because there's two different things that cause winter. One of them is initially what caused winter was Ceres, not Persephone. Ceres is the one who got sad. Ceres is the one who stopped letting the plants grow. Persephone was anecdotal to that. Now later, when Persephone has to go back down into the underworld because she gave the pomegranate seeds, it depends on your relationship with the themes of Persephone and Ceres, how that plays out in your chart. So for instance, if you it plays also into fate and free will. So for example, when you are growing up and you're close to your mother, if you are close to your mother, eventually you're going to most likely separate to a large degree. Usually, maybe you're a teenager, that would be a common time, or maybe you're 20, maybe something happened when you were 6, right? Maybe your mom died, for instance. Maybe you make it all the way till you're 30 and you move out of home. But at some point, you pretty much differentiate from your mom. That is a Persephone theme. That is built into human nature and animal nature. You leave the nest, okay? So there's something fated about that, but the specific form in which that takes is many in multitude. It might be beyond your control, which is the Persephone myth, where like she's initiated into the beginnings of adulthood without her permission. She's abducted. But if we have enough kind of, there's always a debate about how much we control our outer life, right? And it's different for different people. But some people seem to have more control over certain kinds of circumstances than others under those of those issues. Maybe the other person has more control over other circumstances. I don't know. But for people who can choose when to leave mother, or a mother-like figure, it doesn't have to be mom. You might not have a mom. You might not have 2 dads. And then maybe one of them is more nurturing than the other. Maybe there's so many different ways it can play out, which is why obviously, as you know, as well as anyone, because I've heard you say it in your podcast, and it's obvious to any cognizant, self-aware, conscientious astrologer, all these things have to be taken into context in the chart of whom you're looking. But some people seem to be able to separate from their mother-like figure of their own, volition more easily than others. And for them, there's less fatedness, it seems, in that separation and more free will. But the fact that it has to happen anyway at some point, unless the child dies first, which happens also, there's still something destined about the separation. So she represents the fact that you are going to separate from your mother and you be initiated into your own adulthood at some point. And that plays out in different ways, even in the same person at different times. Like for me, I was leaving high school. I think it was between my senior year in high school and the first year in college. And it might have been between the first and second year of college, but I'm pretty sure it's like before I went to college. And my best friend asked me to drive out west to California with him. We were in New York State, upstate New York. And I was like, I don't think that's going to happen. I think I asked my parents. That was a good boy. She's like, no, you can't go out west with your friend. I'm like, okay. So I told my friend, he's like, Noah, just do me a favor. Read the first 40 pages of On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Just read it for me this week. And then tell me what you think. It didn't take long for me to change my mind. I was like, let him go with
Great book.
And my mom was so mad. Hi, Mom, if you're watching this. She was like, she's like, so who, this was my Persephone moment. This was my first Persephone moment. And my friend was Hades. Right. So if I wanted to look at our charts together, you could do it in synastry, or you could do a composite, I guess, if you wanted to. Where's his Pluto? Where's my Persephone? You know, you can start to make connections. And I personally believe, as someone who believes in mythological astrology, that it matters. That I think that the myths have enough archetypal, philosophical significance that they can carry over into the realm of astrology. It's not even carrying over. It's just they're co-creating each other, because astrology is, I would argue, the most ancient of all the crafts and sciences. More ancient than astronomy, more ancient than mythology. Because when I think of 500,000 years ago, humanoid-like creatures, or 1 million years ago, however long these first humanoid-like creatures were like looking up at the sky in wonder, and there were a lot more stars back then because there was no light pollution. I find it impossible to believe that they were not making connections with what they were seeing and how they were feeling and getting on in the world. And so I personally believe astrology to be the oldest, best of the crafts. But yeah.
Well, it's definitely one of the most ancient ones. We know that historically. How ancient, how old, we don't know, because a lot of things are destroyed. A lot of history is erased.
I mean, there's beetles in Africa who navigate by the Milky Way.
Wow.
They're essentially astrologers.
They're following their guiding star. That's what they're doing.
Exactly. I mean, it's just they haven't put it down on paper, like, you know.
For sure. Well, that makes sense for me, what you're saying about how to look at Persephone and Cirrus in your chart. Absolutely. And it is very much individual. It is very much dependent on your chart, but it also very much dependent on the synastry, like you said. Like if you're looking at a story specifically where someone's been quote unquote abducted, like you're saying, they weren't necessarily abducted, but it's kind of like if you're looking at mythologically, you did eat the pomegranate without knowing what the pomegranate was going to do. So maybe one day you want to tell us all everything that happened on the road. But maybe today we'll just focus on going into Persephone, unless of course the stories are very relevant to Persephone.
I can't think of any off the top of my head that were relevant to Persephone, but there probably is in there somewhere.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Actually, yeah. So speaking of which, the personalized version of abduction. So abduction can be very literal. It unfortunately is for children in this world, which is hard to believe, but apparently it's true. I haven't met any, but one hears about them. But then there's more subtle forms. Like I have a client who she has Persephone in her 4th house. So when you're a mother, you're Ceres and your daughter is Persephone. Now remember, this doesn't have to be mother-daughter. It could be father or son, but I tend to think of it usually, since we live in this patriarchal world, where it's not because it's patriarchal. It's just that from what I can see, most men identify with being males, and vice versa. And so it's just it's very convenient and simple to speak of mother-daughter when you're talking about Ceres Persephone.
Yeah,
Although
exactly.
there could always be exceptions. So,
Well, we mean it symbolically, what you're saying. What you're saying, we don't mean it literally. So
well, I kind of
symbolically,
do mean it
like
literally, actually.
as well.
So I do, because if I like, so I actually do mean it literally too. I have a daughter, and
Mhm.
she can, if I so choose, and if it resonates and makes sense, Persephone in my chart can be represented by my daughter.
Right.
It doesn't have to be in all cases for all people, but if it makes sense for that moment in time that you're looking at, then one has the right to do that. If I had a son, would I call Persephone in the chart my son? Sure, if it made sense. It's just less likely, because most of the time, male babies who grow up in the United States of America, which is what I'm familiar with, associated as being boys most of the time.
Mhm.
And so it's just simpler and more, not including all the exceptions, of which there are many. Makes sense to, when I think of Ceres and Persephone, I usually think mother-daughter, because they were
Right.
mother and daughter in the mythology. And there are many
Right.
mothers and daughters in this life. Okay. So I have a client who has Persephone in her fourth house. Therefore, she is Ceres in her chart, and Persephone is her daughter. Now,
Mhm.
she doesn't have a daughter. Well, she might, but it's not relevant to the story. However, her Persephone is very close to Juno in the chart. Juno is significant other. Technically, Juno is Jupiter's wife, but as I practice astrology, Juno means significant partner. And the simplest form, like her simplest, interpretation is your partner, either your husband or your wife. And so that would suggest that some kind of abducted, like whatever abducted daughter scenario comes up in her life, or initiated daughter, is connected with her husband. She is married to a man, so her husband. And so it was so interesting during our session to discover that her husband found out he had a daughter he didn't know about like 10 years later, which catapulted this whole series of events, whether or not they were going to meet this daughter and so on and so forth. And they finally, actually just talked to this client like a couple of days ago, and I happened to see her in that cusp of time. Within these two periods of time I saw her, which was only like 3 weeks, for the first time ever, they met this lost daughter, this Persephone character. And they're like, everything's going great. Like they get to see her and be with her. She's like around 10 years old. She is Persephone in the sense that her Persephone is in her fourth house by Juno, by her husband. It's her husband's daughter. See what I mean?
Wow.
So that's the kind of thing that you can see in the chart, and you have to be creative. Like if you're an astrologer and you're not creative, good luck. You're going to turn into one of those astrologers who like tells people what's going to happen in 10 years, and you're probably going to be wrong.
Probably. That's interesting. Was there anything that you saw in your client's chart that unlocked that Persephone at the time when they found out about the daughter?
I haven't had a chance to look into. I actually asked her for the exact date of their I haven't been able to do all the research yet.
Yeah.
But I guarantee there will be things you can find, because astrologers can always find something. That's like their gift, is to find stuff.
That is what we do.
And that's where being creative helps. But
exactly.
I think let me quickly look at that as a different one. Yeah, I got some other examples, but I don't have her information up in my notes right now, so I don't. I can just look at her chart though, and I have her chart up.
That's
yeah,
okay.
so she has Ceres rising. This
Oh,
client, and she has
wow.
Persephone conjunct Juno. So she has like she already self-associates as a mother-like figure. So when she met this lost daughter, who she could have been jealous, she could have been really mad at her husband. Like, you have a daughter, you didn't tell me, or whatever, She wasn't, because has Ceres rising. So she's like a nurturing personality, and she gladly and happily took in this daughter. The daughter doesn't live with them, but like the daughter is now part of their life.
That's beautiful. I love that
Yeah.
story, especially the acceptance part, because it is such a difficult thing to, I suppose, face. I mean, especially when it comes out nowhere. But my question is, so she had that innately in her chart to be ready to be a mother. What if you have it the other way around? What if a woman finds out that her partner has a child, or they both find out that the partner has a child they didn't know about, and the woman does not feel that nurturing mother wake up in her? She does feel the jealousy. She does feel discomfort. Where
Like if
would
they have
we
Ceres and
normally
Scorpio.
hear something like that, right? You would imagine so.
So,
But have you seen that?
No, because I just started doing this research on Persephone, like actual research where I'm asking people questions and talking to them about Persephone really recently, like a month ago. So I've only looked at, I'm actually sending people questions, and I'm going to send them to you later.
Love
where
that.
they can hopefully answer, and I glean all this information. But I've only looked at like 4 charts so far, and like looked at them in detail with their answers.
Yeah.
And
I think
so
we should do this
put together all the pieces.
in a year's time and see how much you've gathered, because it seems like you're gathering a lot at the moment.
Yeah, because I'm in gathering phase. Yeah.
But in the mythology aspect, we paused on where Persephone had the fruit. She had pomegranate seeds, right? And then she reconnected with her mother. And then there was the time for her to go back. Like, we stopped somewhere where, how did she find out that she has to go back? How did she learn that? And how did she feel about that?
I don't remember how she learned that.
I remember, I think she found out before she left. And didn't Hades tell her, hey, by the way, before you go back to your mother, I just need you to know you need to be back here in 6 months?
I don't know. I don't remember reading that specific part of the myth. So, but that may have been like since there's so many alternative versions, there's probably both. She found out before and after. And how does she feel? That again depends on who you are and where your Persephone is in your chart. Like, you might be pissed and go back and be mad 6 months out of the year for the rest of your life. Or you might be like, okay, I got tricked, but this is what it is now. The underworld's not so bad. Let's just be the awesome queen of the underworld, right? There is a whole culture that celebrated Persephone. And I'm not even talking the pre-Hellenistic period. I'm talking like there was some culture, I think it was in Greece, that did celebrate Persephone as someone who was not, I don't even think abducted. Like, I don't even think Pluto got into that, or Ceres might not have made it into that, their specific version of the myth, but she was just the overlord of the underworld. And so like, you might be very happy being in charge of the dead souls, right? It depends on your relationship with Pluto. I mean, initially, like the whole idea of
if you have Persephone in Scorpio.
Yeah, exactly.
The other way around.
Yeah, or in the 8th house.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, you might really love it. And there's just so many different ways it could fall. But so we don't know. I don't think we know. I don't remember ever reading anything or anyone ever saying anything about how Persephone felt about being the ruler of the underworld. So I feel like that's really up to each individual to decide for themselves.
For sure. Yeah.
I imagine that she ended up enjoying it and owning it, because when you're initiated into difficult circumstances, life is terrible, but then you grow up, right? And I'm not saying that in real life, if you're actually abducted by a person and kept in their prison, I'm not saying you're going to get used to that. But this is mythology, this is archetypes, this is our inner world. So as I left my mother that first time, like, that wasn't fun. I was like, I told my mom, no, I'm not going to do it. She says, I'm going out west with my friend. That was hard. That felt bad, but I had to do it because, you know what? I was like 18 years old. I was ready to go, or 17 or whatever. And it was going to happen sooner or later. I wasn't going to do what my mom says for the rest of my life. Lord forbid. So I'm still a good boy. I love you, Mom. But I definitely don't follow her directions necessarily. So
Yeah,
so it's just a matter of time. So that is uncomfortable at first, but then you grow up and you integrate your own autonomy into your old self. And then when you face your mother again, you're at a higher level and you are an equal to your mother rather than under her. So when Persephone came back after being in the under, so she reunited with her mom, she went back down for half a year. She came back up to her mom. Her mom was overjoyed again, and the crops grew, and it was spring and summer. At that time, that second time she came up, she was a different person than she was the first time she came up. First time was like relief, like, oh my God, I finally get to leave, the underworld. And the second time, it's like she'd already done the underworld twice now, and she knew she was going back there. Maybe she started falling in love with Pluto.
Mm-hmm. There's a term for that in psychology, though.
Right. And that's why it doesn't work. Is that's the case when I know what you're talking about, when you fall in love with your captor.
Yes.
Yeah. And
what was that term again? Do you remember? I can't
remember the word. Yeah, I know I don't remember the word.
All right. Well, people know what we're talking about, I'm sure.
But also it's so hard to know what culture was like 10,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago.
Exactly.
So there's this myth in the Ramayana, which is my favorite story, the Ramayana, where what's his name? Surpat, I can't remember his name. He's like the bad guy in the Ramayana. He's like this evil demon overlord who lives in this island off of the coast of India. And he steals Rama's wife, right? Am I confusing stories? He steals like the main woman of the story, who is amazing, and the dude is very distraught, and he goes and finds her and gets her back. When Surpanaka, I think his name is Surpanaka, there's this funny quote in the story that we have Ram Dass's telling of it, which is really cute. He's like a cute storyteller, and I don't remember exactly the words, but as it plays out in my memory, it's so funny. He says, "Stealing is a good way to get a wife." And he says it so innocently and like jovially. And in his mind, that's a fine way to get a wife, because he's the demon. A, he's a demon. And B, this story was not written in modern times. I'm not saying that 3,000 years ago, stealing was a good way to get a wife. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that how we think about and talk about and interact with husbands and wives and all this stuff is not so clear from one millennium to another. And I cannot just like put my value system on top of theirs without a lot of thought and consideration. And so the fact that if Persephone fell in love with Pluto, or if your inner Persephone falls in love with your inner Pluto, or with the inner Pluto of someone that you're dating, who didn't actually steal you, but like maybe kind of took you away from your mom a little bit because the mom and like you don't get along. Like I was Pluto in a sense to my wife. I mean, when I was first dating my wife, it was fine when we were friends. The mother actually liked me. But once we got serious and she knew I was like really serious with her daughter, it shifted. She's like, "Who are you, Pluto? Don't take my daughter." And I was like, "I'm not trying to take your daughter. It's just we love each other and we want to be together." Right. So I still represented Pluto to her. So in a sense, I could have represented Pluto to my now wife as well, because there was this thing where I was taking her away from her mom. I wasn't taking her away from her mom, but it feels like that on some level. Right.
Right.
And so I'm losing myself. Too much Gemini.
No, it was very good. Too much Gemini. Too much
Where
Gemini.
Was I going? I was going to make a point though.
You were saying you also represent Pluto as much as you represent Persephone, as
much
as you represent Cirrus.
Yeah, talking about cultures in different millennia. So
right.
So when I say that the captured can fall in love with a captor in an archetypal, metaphorical sense, that is, it's okay to say maybe Persephone fell in love with Pluto, even though she was abducted by him, because we're talking about archetypes, and what those stories look like back then might not be exactly they didn't maybe feel the same way as they feel to us.
Mhm. Yeah, and I completely agree with that statement. I mean, even 100 years ago, life was so different. Even 50 years ago, life was so different. How can we know
Yeah.
what the ancients of the time were thinking when they were noting down that myth? How much did they change from the mythology? Because at first it was mouth to mouth, right? Like, sorry, mouth to mouth. That's a German
Mouth to mouth
saying.
recitation.
Mouth to mouth recitations. That's the way Germans speak. I don't know why that came through. Too much Gemini. I have too much Mercury again. So yeah, like at first it was recitations and at first it was very verbal. And then when they started writing it down, like how much did they actually change the stories? How much did they change the myth? How much was it adjusted to the time at the time when they were writing this down, to how much did they change it from original stories that were told? And what is the original story myth anyway? Like where does it start? When do you call it an original myth? So it's interesting. And it's interesting what you said in the beginning, where you've recently discovered that a very old myth of Persephone was that um, she took herself down to the underworld with the becoming the guide for souls that couldn't find their way. And that's a completely different interpretation. So my question is, and I mean, this is always obviously theoretical. I don't know. You've answered in the beginning as well a little bit, but I don't know, after us talking about this for an hour, I wanted to ask you, and I wanted to see if you've got any other opinions around this. But do you think that one of the reasons why we don't really use Persephone in the chart, besides the fact that it's a very small asteroid and we don't really use that many asteroids, but she's not even the part of the big four, why wasn't she included? Do you think it's part of it is the cultural zeitgeist and the way that we have a little bit erased this idea, or we are blind to the idea that all of us in some way or another have been victimized at one point, and then we had to turn around and find the Hades, the Pluto within us, and find the power within us as well.
Wait, so your question was, why don't we use her regularly in the charts? Because she's not part of the zeitgeist, or because it's part of the zeitgeist to not? Can you repeat
yes.
that question?
So do you think that it's part of the cultural zeitgeist to ignore Persephone in our lives and in ourselves? So to ignore the fact that, for instance, okay, you have, we had to grow up at one point. So I suppose easier way to approach this question is to ask you first a different one. And maybe, do you think that part of what Persephone she represents our first kind of look at darkness, our first look at the world is not all flowers and spring and butterflies. There is some sort of darkness to all of this. There can be violence, there can be discomfort, there can be ugliness to all of this, and this is taking away our innocence in a way.
All right, so I can answer your first question. I don't think that my answer to your first question is no. I don't think that she's not a thing in the chart because we're not ready to confront her. I think that it's just because she's a small asteroid. Okay. I did look her up, and she's like around 50 kilometers wide, and she was discovered a long time ago in 1895. And actually, I have a date, so I could cast the chart later and see her inception date.
Yes, that'd be great.
And the second question, what was the second question? Oh, are we ready to confront? I don't think that, I think there is a sense in which, since she's representing our first initiation, but there is another chart piece that's object in the chart that is well accepted by astrologers and used by everyone, that also represents initiation, predating Persephone, typically thought of as such, Chiron. So I don't think she's like representing our darkness that we haven't been able to contend with yet in that sense, because we already got Chiron for that, and we have Pluto for that. Although Pluto was discovered after Persephone, he was used by astrologers right away because he's huge. He's a big planet. So however, I was actually thinking about the relationship between Chiron and Persephone for a couple of reasons. One is because three reasons at least. One is because Persephone, although we've been talking about her as being like the teenager abducted, or, you know, by the way, that abduction can look like so many other things too. It could be like, say you've already grown up and you have 4 kids. You can still have your inner Persephone that's getting initiated into new parts of life, right? Like you could have a career that's amazing, and then someone sues you for no reason, and you get blindsided and you lose everything, and you have to like go live in a shack. Like that could be considered a Persephone moment if it's under the right, like if it has Persephone themes, for instance. It's not like you have one Persephone moment, that's it. But that's a side note. So since Persephone is initiation into something different by separation from your mother, that was the wound. When's your first separation from your mother? Birth. So birth is a Persephone moment. Chiron is also has a initiation at birth for a different reason, and it's not even at birth. Like Chiron, in your first couple 2-3 years of life, you have you could call it a shamanic consciousness. You don't put everything down in words and delineate. You are not a Virgo person yet, right? Even if you have a sun in Virgo. Of course, Virgo is much deeper than making lists, but still, just to make a joke. So, so there's this sense in which you're initiated into some wound in the Chiron sense, also at birth, or even when you're going through the birth canal. Like there's some wounding. It's not that it's necessarily painful, but you're being separated from the womb, right? And so Persephone shares this with Chiron, but it has, I think, in a different way. And then the third way that Persephone relates to Chiron is it's a little more, it's much more complex. So Chiron, do you want to go into this or not? It's very interesting. It gets into the triple goddess, and how Persephone is one of the members of this form of the triple goddess. Okay. So I'll just start with the Chiron idea, and then we'll try to get all the way, make a full circle. So Chiron, as you all know, had a wound he couldn't heal, and he finally traded places with Prometheus. By the way, Prometheus is another point I use in the chart for everyone, and I take just as seriously as Persephone and Uranus, and I do not consider Uranus to be Prometheus. As you know, it's like a thing, but I consider Prometheus to be his own thing. Anyways, that's another story. But he did trade places. When Prometheus traded places with Chiron to set them both free, because they were both trapped, they both had to be freed, he went down to the underworld to be initiated into his afterlife. And who initiated him but Hecate? Now, Hecate is one of the triple goddess members that Persephone belongs to. Hecate is the crone. She is the balsamic moon phase. After the balsamic moon disappears in the sky and becomes a new moon and a waxing crescent, that's Persephone. And when Persephone grows up and becomes the mother, she is Ceres, or Demeter.
Okay.
So there's this Persephone, Ceres, Hecate triple goddess structure. And
so Ceres is the full moon, Persephone is the new moon, waxing crescent moon, and Hecate is balsamic moon, of course.
Exactly.
Okay. The crown. Okay.
And so that's a whole nother layer. And then like what you can look at your phase of the moon that you have in your natal chart, and or your progressed moon or whatever, and like correlate those. Like if you have a balsamic moon, then you have a stronger Hecate nature than Persephone nature. But if you have Persephone rising, well, there goes that idea. Then you got both, right? If you have a new moon and Persephone rising in Scorpio, then you got a cool chart, and I want to talk to you, right?
Yeah. Right. That's interesting.
Yeah. So Hecate was related in the mythology of Persephone because she heard Persephone get abducted. She didn't see it, but she could hear the cries. And she was like, Demeter, your daughter got taken. I don't know who did it. They couldn't see any evidence. So that's, finally they, Demeter, somehow I don't know how they thought to find Helios to let him know, but Helios knew because he's the sun. He sees everything. So that's how you can use the sun. So like if you want to look at aspects in your birth chart, where is the sun related to your Persephone? The sun illuminates your Persephone's initiation. Because I am saying that literally mythology can translate into astrology if you use it conscientiously and,
Absolutely. Well, it'll be interesting for me now after this conversation to go back and look at charts and see how these moon phases relate to different charts and different people with natal, like for instance, natal new moon, natal full moon. But that makes sense because I completely forgot that Hecate was such a big part of that mythology, that she was the one that told Demeter, hey, your daughter has been taken by Hades, actually.
And then when Persephone came back up finally to be reunited, Hecate was there and gave her a hug. They were friends. Wow. And when she went back down into the underworld every half year, Hecate accompanied her, because Hecate is the goddess of liminal spaces and entrances and exits. So she's super important, which binds them together in the triple goddess formulation, all three. And check this out. The woman who named Pluto, she was a girl, she was 11. She was hanging out with her mother and her grandfather. Triple goddess, if you could consider the grandfather one of the triple goddess figures. Okay. During breakfast in 1930, we have a date for this too, I'm going to cast the chart. And she heard like her dad, her grandfather or her mom was like, hey, this new planet was discovered and they're trying to find a name. And she's like, how about Pluto? Because she knew about mythology. And, the grandfather suggested it to the observatory director or whatever at Harvard, wherever they were. I can't remember what, some college or university. It might have been Oxford. And forgive me, I can't remember the university, but yeah. And then it took. And so she, like this 11-year-old girl named Pluto, in a meeting with 3 generations, which is a triple goddess figuration. And that's just so beautiful. And so there's just all these cute connections that you can make too.
Definitely. There's some magic to it as well. Now, not to get into predictions too much or anything like that, but in terms of interpretation, how would you say, like, I don't want to get into every sign, maybe unless you do, but maybe if we can get into every element and see, like, touch base on every element and see how, for instance, having Persephone in the fire sign would be different from having Persephone in a water sign.
That's a good idea. And I've never thought about it in my life until you just brought it up.
Well, that's why we have podcasts to think about things out loud.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. We could totally talk about that.
Yeah.
And actually, but before we do, I'd like to say one more comment about the sun Persephone. Like you can look at the aspects of Persephone and any of the planets, they all have specific meanings. Some have more than others. Obviously, her aspects to Ceres or Pluto will be like huge, right? But the sun, since he's the one who showed Ceres where Persephone is, like for instance, the one example I gave where they reunited with his lost daughter, she does have sun in the first house, rising with Persephone.
Wow, amazing.
So she she didn't tell, she didn't like tell her husband that, but she was very integral to the process. Like the mother of the lost child reached out to her first.
Wow.
So it's like just interesting. So let's talk about the elements. That's a great idea. Which element do you want to do first?
Let's talk about, hold on, before we do anything, I'm gonna run to the bathroom really quickly.
You want me to stop recording?
Sure, that'd be great.
I'll pause it.
Because I was gonna say we can just keep recording, just keep talking, and I'll just
I'll just pause it.
Yeah, sounds good. Water. I'll take a break. Oh, that was fast.
Okay,
You're just ready to go. Okay. Yeah. Okay, we're back.
I have another example too, another chart example. If you want, before we go into because the chart examples are so interesting. There's another person who has Persephone rising, and she, when she was growing up, felt constantly secondary to her sister, who was getting prime importance by the mother. So she felt, what's the word for that? Slighted.
Neglected?
Yes, neglected or slighted. And so she, having Persephone rising, felt like was Persephone. It took a long time to get over that. And she eventually did, but it took a lot of work. She had some things helping out. It was trines, like within a degree, her Persephone trines Saturn. And with slightly wider orbs trying the moon, which is also a motherly, figure. And so, there's reasons for things to flow between those energies. But the first example I gave had Ceres rising, and she's the mother character in this story. The second example I gave is Persephone rising, and she was slighted as the daughter.
Interesting. What do you think the relationship is with the triple goddess and the moon? Because the moon is the triple goddess as well.
Definitely.
Do you think the triple goddess asteroids just give us more in-depth information around our natal moons as well?
That's a really good question. I think they could. I haven't thought about it exactly in that sense, and I like that statement. I think that's a really perceptive statement. Yeah, they definitely could, and vice versa. I mean, they can elucidate each other. So it's always adding layers of complexity. Now, there is a potential problem with adding layers of complexity, like it can get too much, right? So you don't want to throw 100 asteroids in your chart every day. You really need to let the ones speak to you that are most, and that could change from day to day. I mean, if you have a client, some people might want to, if their client is married to an Eleanor, then you look up the Eleanor asteroid and see where it is and stuff. Like, that's totally fine. I don't do that because it's a little too, I don't know. It's just too much for me. I like to just have a few that I focus on, but that's an option.
And I think that's a great advice for any astrologer, actually, just to focus on one thing at a time and just let that unfold, let that tell you a story, and then go on. So with the Persephone rising chart, what sign was it in? No, that's a way to get into signs.
Yeah, let me look. It's right here.
And maybe we can start with that element.
Okay, that sounds good. So that was Cancer rising.
Wow.
Yeah, she actually said, I feel grateful to be healing a lot of mother wounds. And she's and her Persephone is trining the moon, so that's kind of a nice thing.
I mean, that just phrase, I'm grateful to be healing a lot of mother wounds with Persephone in Cancer. I think that just describes Persephone in Cancer in general.
100%. Yeah.
And I feel like with water signs, what's complicated is that Scorpio is so different from the two because it's fixed water. It's not, so I feel like that would be a little bit different interpretation, but maybe
well, then Pisces is different too. I mean, I just recently heard something about, what was it, Cancer? If I can remember this, I can't remember, but it was tying the three different water signs together in an interesting way that separates them very well. And I just can't remember what the quote is. But yeah, because Cancer is cardinal and Pisces is mutable, so they're all going to be very different from each other. I think I wouldn't say Scorpio is more different from the other two than the other two are.
Yeah, I like that.
But in general, water signs are known to be feeling signs, right? And there's something regenerating about, and like there's like healing motifs that can come up with the water signs, because when you do that, like, so it's like Cancer brings things in, kind of initiates the deals that you're dealing, the issues. Scorpio, you really work on them and do that shadow work. And then Pisces, you get to that's where the real healing and grace comes in, because you can't like force yourself to heal. You can force yourself to do the work in Scorpio, but grace has to come in and do the healing, and that's the Pisces part. Right. So if I would say if Persephone is in any three of the water signs, there's this this contending with feelings on some level.
For sure. Definitely. And I love the way that you've just described it. So with Cancer being the cardinal sign, it's sort of the beginning, the recognition of the pain and the wound. And
Exactly.
then Scorpio is the actual work, the nitty-gritty stuff. And then Pisces is where we actually release and we heal and
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
become whole again. I
Mhm.
love that.
Yeah.
So what about earth signs?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the underworld is
Yeah.
deep in the earth. Like that's one of the huge differences between Persephone and Ceres. Ceres is above the ground, obvious for everyone to see. She's Mother Nature. Persephone is like what's under the ground. Like Ceres doesn't know all the what's going down under the ground. That's not her business. That's Persephone's business. She's deep, like she's the deep part of regeneration, rebirth of plants. That she's the plants themselves. Ceres just
Mm,
like lets the plants grow and like reaps them and feeds them to the people. I mean, I'm not saying that's all she is, but compared to Persephone, she's not as profound in that way. So the
that's
earth signs I
beautiful.
would
Yeah.
feel would have some real affinity with Persephone. Let's start with the cardinal one maybe. So the cardinal earth sign is Capricorn. Um, it's Saturn ruled. So if you had your Persephone and Capricorn, first thing you should think is where's Saturn, and then you note the relationship between Saturn and Persephone. If there's a trine, then there's hopefully a good relationship, or at least something that flows, not necessarily for good, I guess. But if it's
Yeah.
square, that means there's going to be some stuff that you're going to have to work through.
Well, not to interrupt you, but just in terms of the moon, for instance, being in Capricorn, I feel like maybe with Persephone in Capricorn, it's a very similar thing in terms of you have to learn how to nurture yourself, where it is very real, very physical, where with water signs, it all is related to emotions. And of course, it's still nurturing yourself. But maybe with Capricorn, it's some sort of a real event that happened that cut you off from that nurture at some stage in your life, maybe early on as well.
Something more
So that,
concrete.
yeah, yeah, like a concrete situation. We're not going
Mhm.
to throw in examples because we don't really have any on
Yeah.
hand and we don't want to put ideas into people's heads. But if you do have like Persephone and Capricorn, maybe it's something to look into.
Email us.
Yeah, email us, tell us stories.
Yeah, tell stories. Yeah, actually, speaking of which, if anyone wants to be on that list of that like question, I have like 4 questions that relate to Persephone, and you want to help me out in my research so I can be a better astrologer with Persephone in mind, then let me know and I will email you those questions.
Yeah,
You have to give me
definitely. At
your
the end, we'll
birthday
plug
though.
in all your things and emails and I can send it directly
Cool.
to you or to me and I can pass it on to you.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter. But yeah, I think it's a great idea.
So I like your
Um,
your association with that. Yeah, that something concrete happened just to you if you have Persephone in Capricorn.
mhm, mhm.
But then you get to the next
Concrete,
earth
that
sign.
Capricorn word. Yeah, go
Right. Then
on.
you get the
Sorry.
next earth sign, Taurus, which is also very concrete. And Taurus is like also very Mother Nature. So, but it's a more lovely sign. Um, so maybe Persephone and Taurus, it's a softer place to be. So again, you think of Venus when you think of Taurus. So you like note the relationship between Venus and actually Venus, and I'd already thought that Venus and Persephone, their aspect could indicate how your like love interest is related to the removal of you from your mother or your lover's mother, because like I was saying earlier with my wife and I, at the time we were just dating, since I was essentially removing the daughter from the mother in some sense, in some very real sense,
Mhm.
that brings to mind Venus and Persephone aspects.
That makes sense to me as well, where it's still a separation from the mother. It's still painful, but it's
Mm,
it's sort of like you're easing, it's an easier way out
yeah,
of the
right.
nest. It's not, you're not actually kidnapping anybody, you're not actually abducting anybody. You're just
Right. But if it were a square, then it might be hard. But if it
yeah.
were like a trine or sextile, maybe it was like really nice. Like maybe the mother's like, oh, I'm so glad you're taking my daughter off my hands and gonna go give her another life.
Yeah,
Right.
finally. Yeah, love that.
So the
Okay, and
next
then
earth sign.
Virgo.
So that makes us one think of Mercury. So Mercury is the one who actually went down and bargained for Persephone. So he's like in your corner in a way, right? And he's kind of like, he's a psychopomp. Persephone's a psychopomp, or has that potential anyway, depending on the mythology. And I think she greets when the dead come into the underworld, she greets them, is how I see her, you know?
I think so.
I don't
I
see
think
her
I've
as
read
a
it in a few
judge.
stories.
Yeah, and I don't see her as a judge. I see Pluto as a judge. I see like Pluto be good. You go here, you go there. Because I personally see Pluto as very psychoanalytical. I heard someone say recently something against that idea. And I do like the idea that Pluto, that when you have to embody your Pluto, because he is under the ground, he's very earthy. So you don't want to just be stuck in your head. But I think Pluto has both. I think he's like a master of a third of the realms of the universe. Like Zeus has got the overworld, Neptune maybe has the ocean, and then Pluto has the underworld. And so he's obviously like a very supreme character, and Persephone is right there with him. So she becomes supreme through her story. She wasn't born that way, but she becomes co-ruler with him. So if Persephone is in Virgo, then I guess I got sidetracked. She's like bringing in the dead without judging them, which is really nice. Because why did Hades take Persephone in the first place? Because he was bored? Because he didn't have enough light in his life? Because it was cold down in hell? Yeah, probably. He's like, I need a wife or husband. And so he got one. And so she's not, why would she be all judgy? That wouldn't make a lot of sense. He's already doing that.
Yeah. I love what you're saying there. And I don't think you sidetracked at all. I actually think that what you're describing right now is very important to Virgo, which is, why did he actually abduct her? Yes, he did want a wife, but not just a person to nurture him and to be the light in his life, but also somebody to give somebody a job. Because as a wife, she's not only just there to be romantic, or as a husband, she's not only there to be romantic with Hades, she's also there to do a job in the underworld, which is probably greeting the guests, which is probably being a host, which is probably setting the table for the newcomers, right? Who knows? Right. So I think all of this is also Virgo as well when it comes to Persephone.
Yeah, because Virgo can be judgmental, right? But if you're living your higher Virgo nature, then you're not judging, you're actually serving.
Yeah.
Or you're differentiating, but not in a judgmental way. You have that skill to separate out, but you don't say one thing's better than another. And so she would have that. And I always think of Virgo as the smartest of the signs. So if you're a Virgo out there, you're welcome. And so it's not like Gemini. I love Gemini, dear to my heart, but I don't necessarily think it's the smartest. I think Virgo is. So I think she's a brilliant genius there at doing Persephone things, which are many, multifaceted. We didn't even hit on all the Persephone themes in this talk yet. I feel like we left out a lot, but there's a lot to talk about.
You can plug it in anytime, but I suppose we can also touch on those themes as we're going for the elements. Because actually, that's really helpful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, before we get to the next element, can I bring up one Persephone theme? That's very not unnatural, but contrived. It's not entirely contrived, but it's totally off topic. But I just wanted to throw it in there because it's interesting. So the glyphs historically come from places that are mysterious to me, especially the one for Persephone. I have no clue where she came from, but in AstroGold software, they have a glyph for Persephone, which I was super psyched about. It means they take her seriously enough to give her her own glyph. I do not know where they got the glyph from, but I can tell you what it looks like. It is a circle. So there's something called, most of the glyphs are composed of the circle of spirit, the crescent of soul, and the cross of matter, right? And there's some combination of those. For Persephone, there's no exception. There is the circle of spirit over the crescent of soul. But the circles, at least in AstroGold software, is stretched out, so it's more of an oval, and it's connected to the crescent with the little line. So it's the only glyph that I know of where you get the circle and the crescent, spirit and soul only, with no cross of matter. There are other glyphs that just have the cross of matter and just have the crescent of soul, like Jupiter and Saturn, for instance, both. So it's really interesting that she has this unique combination, and I love it. No cross of matter was fascinating because you would think she would have all cross of matter. She's the lord of the underworld. But that's Pluto's position originally, right? She's bringing maybe some lightness into the underworld or something, or maybe she brings the underworld out into, like when she comes back into the overworld and the plants grow, she is lightening up the overworld, but she's also bringing the underworld, what she has learned in the underworld, up to the surface to her mother. In some way, it's been transformed maybe or transmuted, but she has that knowledge that Sirius doesn't have, that only she and Pluto have. And that, like, Mercury doesn't have it. He just visits for a couple minutes, right? So she's got deep wisdom of the underworld, but yes, she doesn't have a cross of matter in this particular glyph. There are other glyphs of Persephone that you can find on the internet, but this is the one Astro Gold uses. So I just think that's interesting.
I do agree. That's very beautiful the way you described it too. So it's as if she's directly connected to the underworld, but she doesn't really have any stability in the real world. So she's almost like half spirit, half human.
Yeah, that's interesting. Interesting take too. And the fact that she's one of the members of the triple goddess, has to do with the crescent of soul, which is the moon, the shape of the crescent moon. Connected to the circle of spirit. The circle of spirit I always equate to basically being your essential spirit, something like the sun in your chart. Yeah. It's this essential spirit that vitalizes you and your consciousness that shines automatically, pre-verbal consciousness that's just shining out into the rest of your life, including into yourself. So yes, it's a very elegant, like elevated glyph in that way, without the cross of matter being in there.
Definitely. Okay. I agree.
So you want to go back
Thank you for that.
Yeah, you want to go back to the elements?
Of course. Maybe we can go straight into the air signs, since we've been talking about glyphs, right? Makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. What's the cardinal air sign? Libra?
Libra.
Okay, so Libra.
Which is still always so strange for me, but yeah, it's Libra.
Because you think of Libra as, why is that? Because she's ruled by Venus, or because
I think of Libra as being very indecisive, because she's always trying to find balance, but she's still cardinal. She's still going forward.
Okay.
And it's just strange for me in my own head. It's not to say that there's anything wrong with Libra being cardinal. It makes sense. But not to be rude to all the Libras out there, but Libras tend to be very indecisive.
I think it's interesting because the whole male-female thing in this world and in nature is like super fascinating, especially when they converge and morph and become something different. Like in the world of the fishes, like it's so many interesting examples in the aquatic world of, the male fishes carrying the eggs in their body and stuff, just so many variations in nature where male and female are mixed. And I love that. So this is an example, because Libra is a quote male unquote or masculine sign. It's a yang sign, or a solar sign, you could think of it, or a day type sign, but which is typically considered an outward thing rather than an inward thing, yang. But at the same time, it's ruled by Venus, who is clearly a female goddess. So that mixture between male and female adds Libra some complexity, I feel like, as opposed to, say, Taurus, which is both yin and ruled by a female figure.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. And I find that kind of complexity in all air signs. They're all a bit, they all have a bit of a male in it. Like even Mercury, in some mythology, he is both sexes. He's both male
Mercury
and
is
female.
is totally her. I consider Mercury to be the total they, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. So anyway, Libra, Persephone. What's
So
that
yeah,
like?
Persephone and Libra. Let's see, what do we got here? Air sign. I like to think of, you said indecisive. I normally think of Libra as being relational, which
Mhm.
can look like indecision, but doesn't have to. The
Well, hold on.
facts.
I need to correct myself before you go on. Indecisive. What I mean by indecisive is that usually Libras see both perspectives as equal, and that's why they tend to be indecisive. They see good in both options.
Yeah.
Right. But go on.
Okay. But then again, they're cardinals. So I feel like they should be able to choose. Like the one person I think of when I think of Libra, I should have more than one, but I always think of one. She is very decisive, but she's always knows your point of view. Like you're saying, she gets your point of
Mhm.
view and she makes a decision based on, so it's like, it's great because it's really kind of a very holistic place to come from. And that's great
Mhm.
because Venus is the relational goddess and she wants people to come together and get along and relate. And so she's the perfect ruler for Libra. So I guess it may be I'm guessing some Libras are more indecisive than others. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that. But in terms of Persephone, um, I mean, air signs are associated with thought. Maybe we should start with a different air sign because I'm drawing a blank on Persephone and Libra.
That's okay. We can. That'll be right. Maybe we can both think of something as we go along. We can start with which one calls to you?
Um, Gemini.
Go on.
So maybe Persephone and Gemini. I mean, it's. I wish it's so much better when you have examples. I guess we could just, put the archetypes together though. She maybe likes to. Maybe the way she deals with her initiation is, multifaceted. For instance,
Mhm.
maybe instead of just trying to find like the one answer to fix her problem with mom, she like tries a lot of different things or something. Like that would be one way to play it out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Also, maybe, perhaps, I just had this idea. Because Gemini is related to siblings as well. Maybe if you have Persephone and Gemini in your chart, your mom has been so busy that one of your siblings becomes a parent to you or something like that. So maybe there's that going on too in
Hmm.
terms of air signs. And I was just thinking about
Cool.
air signs and air element in general. Would you agree that maybe air elements or air signs, with having Persephone in it, would be, in terms of having these relational dynamics that are unusual, or quote unquote unusual, not as mythology would say, for instance, like a classical mother and a classical daughter, but
Hmm.
something a bit more complex because it's an air sign, because it's a more human
Yeah. Yeah,
element
that
as
sounds
well.
that sounds like good. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. That sounds like a good thing. Yeah, I mean that sounds reasonable. Yeah, something more rarefied, like air. Yeah,
Yeah.
and also in like dealing with the circumstances of being Persephone in an intellectual manner rather than trying to, embody it. Like instead of like getting in a wrestling match with your mom, you get in an argument with her.
Yeah.
I don't know how
Yeah.
many
Makes
daughters
sense.
wrestle their moms, but there's
Hopefully
probably a
not
few.
many. I'm
I
sure
don't know.
there's a
I
few.
think hopefully, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's a friendly wrestling match.
Okay, hopefully it's a friendly wrestling match. But yeah, that makes sense too. Like you said, intellectual approach. So for me, the example that comes through is, for instance, if you have Persephone in a water sign, you might be more likely to deal with your pain by going to a plant medicine ceremony. But if you have it in an air sign, maybe you're doing it through
Yeah.
research for knowledge, and maybe going for talk therapy and things
Yeah,
like that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also Gemini being Mercury ruled, the same things we said about Virgo in terms of Mercury would also apply to Gemini.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. But I think all of that relates to Libra as well. I think we've already answered the Libra question because it is all relational. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just, I mean, I think the cardinal part of Libra is really left out of our conscious or like overall take on Libra as a sign in society. we as society don't think of Libra as being a cardinal sign, in my opinion. We think of, well, first of all, the society isn't super cognizant of the difference between cardinal and mutable and fixed anyway. And astrologers mostly are these days, and maybe they always were, but in terms of like how Libra's talked about, it's not like, I don't know, it's not the message I get from society, from culture. And
I agree with you completely.
But I think that we should make sure we challenge that. And so if we're going to challenge that by taking okay, so air signs are like the swords, right? In the tarot deck. So it's decisive. Like Libra, it can be decisive. It's the scales. Libra is the scales that weighs the options. So maybe it's indecisive because life is hard and there's so many options to weigh. But if you have a healthy Libra, you should be able to cut through your indecision and come to a decision. That's what I feel like a healthy Libra would do. The one Libra I was mentioning earlier is a very healthy Libra.
Right.
And she is decisive. Yeah. And so, and how do you do that? Through Venusian ways, because since she's ruled by Venus, so you use this relational, you use this wisdom of relationships intellectual wisdom in order to guide your sword to make a clean cut and make a decision. So with Persephone and Libra, you can like make a clean cut maybe with Pluto. You're like, Pluto, you're out of here. You took me away for 3 years from my mom. I'm going back to my mom. You suck. Like that would be Persephone and Libra. Maybe they hedged their bets for 3 years, but then they finally made the decision or something. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And especially in terms of like you're saying, being cardinal or being a little bit more forward with our communication. Maybe that's what's also missing in society. I don't know about where you live, but maybe it's something that I'm noticing around in my circle. That's something we're still learning, to be a little bit more forward in our communication. So maybe that's why we take away the cardinal part of Libra, you know. But
yeah,
what
because
you're saying
oh, go on. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just agreeing.
Okay, because Mercury is communicating, but in Gemini, he's not necessarily forward. He's just like, he's not forward, but he's got his hands in so many things. He doesn't like know how to just put it to you bluntly in one thing in a way that's, condensed. So, but Libra has that maybe ability to be forward, but it's more relational. It's not like he's going to tell you. It's not like she's going to necessarily tell you what it is, unless she has some aspect with Mercury that would promote that. But her decision might be clear in her mind, in Persephone's mind.
Yeah.
And then the last air sign is Aquarius, which is the most bamboozling of all the signs. It's like this whole Saturn-Uranus thing is so weird because like it's Saturn ruled and now it's Uranus ruled, and those two are opposing each other because Saturn's like the limits of the solar system.
Yeah.
Uranus breaks through. How could they both rule the sign when they're so different? And what binds them together is Chiron. So Chiron actually can help to eliminate this difference between Saturn and Uranus ruled Aquarius. So it's very, very odd sign. Aquarius is known to be odd anyway, and like this is just one more layer of oddness. So Persephone's
Aquarius is
in
super
Aquarius.
Weird. Yeah.
Yeah, she's got the weird lover.
Yeah, weird lover. Might seem aloof as well. Something about it is aloof.
Yeah, she won't. Maybe she doesn't even recognize that she's being initiated into some.
Yes. By the way, we're not judging Aquarius. I'm an Aquarius rising, and I 100% agree. It's weird. And now, after my Saturn return is finally at the tail end of it, I'm only just learning. Oh, that's what Saturn ruling Aquarius means. We can get into that later, but yeah. Anyway.
Cool. That's awesome.
But totally aloof, a little bit cold, maybe a little bit detached. Persephone. So maybe the mother was detached, and maybe the Persephone that's grown up is finding partners that are detached as well, or something like that is going on. But yeah, just clarifying what you just said.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can't forget that Aquarius, although they are concerned with being uniquely themselves, they are also concerned with, humanitarian causes. And so if Persephone is feeling aloof from her own initiation or abduction, then maybe partly that's, maybe that's partially because she doesn't know how to, like, if she wants to, I don't know, I can't speak for Aquarius very well. Maybe she wants everyone to like get along, for instance. But if she's like putting her own self on the line and saying, I was just abducted, everybody, hello, it's maybe unbalancing this situation because it's Saturn ruled. So there's all these constraints that you might put on yourself in Aquarius. At the same time as trying to be yourself. It's just a very strange situation. I love Aquarius, actually. I have Aquarius in the 9th house and I have Jupiter there and my midheavens there. So I totally love Aquarius. And one of my roommates is Aquarius sun and I love her as well. So like Aquarius, down with you guys, but it's just really difficult to pinpoint. I mean, it is an air sign ruled by Saturn. It's another weird juxtaposition. Saturn we think of as being very earthy. And he was a god of agriculture also. Originally.
But then Saturn also Saturn is also in its exaltation in Libra. So Saturn is a mystery as well. Saturn is a mystery in general, because we think of it so we connected so much with Capricorn and the material world, we completely forget about the intellectual and the metaphysical aspects of Saturn, for sure. But I think everything that you're saying about Aquarius and Persephone, it rings true to me. It is the maybe humanitarian, maybe you can go too far in being too humanitarian, or maybe you, in order to heal, you need to become a little bit more humanitarian, like, and really accepting yourself too. Maybe there's that, maybe there was little acceptance of who you are. So yeah. Agreeing with that.
Next year we'll do this again and I'll have like 100 examples.
Exactly.
Much clearer ideas.
Exactly. But I think it's fun to explore.
Did we hit all the elements or did we miss one?
No, we missed fire. We just got
We didn't do fire yet?
No, we left it last.
Okay, well, we're both fire signs, so we should definitely do fire.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's start with Aries, my favorite fire sign.
Let's start with Aries. Wonder why.
Like, ruled by Mars, the tough guy, maybe like difficult abductions, sudden and thorough, and just like, now I don't know, where's my Persephone? Oh no, I know.
Do you not know where your Persephone is?
No, I do.
We need to check that.
I just
where is your Persephone?
Today. I gotta look it up. I can't remember. It's like you'd think I would know. I'm like thinking about Persephone all day today. You know what Persephone is. Weird. I can't even find my chart now. Like, who am I? Okay, I found myself.
Did you find yourself
again? Myself on Zoom. Oh, duh! I have Persephone in Aries.
There we go. Oh my God, I love that.
That's probably why I thought it. That's why I was like, "Where's my Persephone?" Because I did see.
I love that.
And she's very close to Chiron. She's around 3 degrees, 15 and 18 Chiron. Well, she's in the 59th minute of 15, so she's almost 19 degrees.
Well, it also makes sense that you correlate Chiron with Persephone so much too.
Well, yeah, but part of that is the whole initiation theme, because I'm reading the book.
That's true. I agree with you as well.
But
you're seeing that connection easier.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. This whole idea of initiation, it's just, yeah. I mean, they're both initiated at birth in some way, so that's pretty huge. So I would say that Persephone and Aries, I mean, the only times I've had like tough times with my mother, that, remember, I think it's okay to use these symbols literally in life. If it's appropriate for you. For me, it's appropriate right now. So I am Persephone, and in this 2-minute period of time, and I had trouble with my mother. I removed myself from my mother on purpose, and it was very sure and striking and like cut like a sword. One I already described you when I said, "No, Mom, I'm going," and I did not.
The Jack Kerouac story.
And that was very hard on her.
Yeah.
Another time is when I mailed her a letter from Nepal in college, that very bluntly stated some of the stuff I was doing there that she did not approve of. And that was very
Oh,
hard, very hard. And why the
yeah.
heck did I do that? That's so Aries. I didn't have to do that.
Yes.
I could have been like, hey, everything's good.
It's
So
the
there's
act
my
without
Persephone and
thinking.
Aries story. Exactly. I mean, I thought about it, but like, it's that my act did not depend upon the thinking.
Hmm. Hmm. You thought about it. You thought it was a bad idea, but might as well do it. That's very Aries.
I went with my intuition. I consider fire signs to
Yeah.
be intuitive. Water's
Yes.
also intuitive, but fire is like a more pure form of intuition, in my opinion.
I agree with you completely. I think Stephen
Cool.
Forrest talks about this a lot, doesn't
Oh,
he?
really? Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, believe so. He talks about fire signs to be part of our, but I agree with you too, because I'm Sagittarius
Yeah,
sun.
totally.
And I
Yeah.
I find that to be true, where it's this instant, this spark of intuition that just comes from nowhere.
Yeah,
I feel like
exactly.
that lives for us in the charts. And that's not to say that if you're not Aries, Sagittarius, or Leo, you don't have that. It's everyone has that in their charts, but it depends on what your access point is. Yeah.
Right. Plus, the intuition doesn't have to be intellectual. And in fact, the way
Yeah.
I'm using it is not even like I'm intuiting some form of energy that has meaning in whatever context we're talking about.
Great.
Like the light
Yeah, I love
intuition of
that.
life is like present in me at all times as the first degree
Yeah.
of Aries. Like I feel like I get, gosh, sounds so what's the word? Egotistical right now.
Psychoanalytical. Yeah,
I feel like I
psychoanalytical.
feel like egotistical saying this out loud and front of everyone, but like I feel like I get the universe in some fundamental instinctual level always. Like there is some aspect of it that's important that is not mysterious. And as a matter of fact, when
Yeah.
people say God is mysterious, you can never understand God, I'm like, no, I don't agree with you. I don't. I think you can
Yeah.
understand God. I don't understand God. I'm not there, but I think one can. And I think on some level we all do already, whether you're conscious of it or not. So like that's first
Well,
degree Aries.
yeah, I think we all have our skills and talents, and I think it's not egotistical to recognize them. Maybe it is in some way, but as Carl Jung said, without ego, we wouldn't even be here.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
what are we even doing? So it's great to use our egos to put it to good. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think those are great examples, and you've already told us in detail in the beginning about your specific example, which relates to Aries and Persephone. So let's finish this up and let's talk about Leo and
Fixed
Sagittarius, which are
fire
the one.
sign, ruled by the
Yeah.
sun. The only sign ruled by the sun. Sun is what sees, like what saw the abduction. So it's kind of an important character.
Yes.
Maybe that's the abduction that doesn't that like is keeps on going for too long, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's the abduction that you managed to somehow get through um un relatively unscathed because you led from your heart and had enough sun cognizance to you knew what was happening. You were like, oh, I see what you're trying to do, universe, but it's not going to work because like my Persephone's in Leo, so I am gonna just sail through this and I'll help other people later because they don't get it as well as I do. Like Leo's got a lot of skill, very skillful,
Yeah.
and with the sun seeing Persephone, I would say maybe it could take that two forms. Like I said, one where she just keeps on being Persephone in the bad way, and she can't get out of it because it's a fixed sign, or two, like using the sun's characteristics to guide you through successfully. Those are my first thoughts.
Mm-hmm. That's really beautiful. I like that. And just to know, to give the other side of it, if,
Mhm.
for instance, there could be a possibility that an abduction that didn't happen because you could foresee it because it is in that Leo sign, because the sun does see it. So maybe it's an abduction that's either delayed, like you said, or like you said, an abduction that you come out from unscathed from. Yeah.
Mhm.
Just to give
Okay.
it the other side of the coin.
Delayed abduction. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like for instance, um, maybe a daughter or son that never moves out of home, something like that, where it's a very unhealed Leo, depending on what squares you've got there as well and what else is going on. Maybe there's a Pluto in
Yeah,
Leo.
totally. Daughter
Yeah.
that never moved away. I love that. I
Mm-hmm.
was hoping my daughter would never move out.
Every father is hoping their daughter never moves out, never gets married.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't mind if she gets married. I just want her to stick around.
They can live with you guys.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a way to live too. Build a
Yeah.
community. Yeah. But anyway, we have been going on for like almost 2 hours. I think almost 2 hours. How long? Because you've got the time.
I think we started a little late because we chatted maybe, but yeah, it's been a
That's
while.
true. Yeah. So we're just going to finish
roughly
up
a
with
couple hours.
Sagittarius and then close this up. And then I think we should definitely come back and talk about Persephone some more and other elements as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sagittarius. That's the mutable fire sign ruled by Jupiter. So, that could be like the wild Persephone.
Yeah.
Uncontained. Like she goes right along with the abduction and thinks it's great because she doesn't even know it's an abduction. She's like, this is fun. And then like she's like, what have I gotten myself into? Yeah. The adventure that goes sour.
Yeah.
And then she comes back and tells everyone she was abducted. They were like, what? You look like you were having a good time. She's like, well, you don't understand.
Exactly. I love that. And yeah, I think it's interesting that we said we'll go for elements, but then we ended up looking at each sign individually anyway. So
yeah,
it's just what happens with astrology. Yeah. But either way, this was really, really fun.
So fun.
I think you're an excellent storyteller. And I think you've got a plethora of knowledge and wisdom as well. I love that you're working and doing astrology and that you've chosen to take this path. It's really cool to see it. I mean, it's beautiful. And I can't wait to see what happens with that path for you. So we're gonna keep an eye on that. And obviously, definitely would love to have you on again. So plug in whatever you need to plug in. Where's your website? Is there anything else you're doing that you want to advertise? How do people find you?
Thank you for your kind words, Anastasia. I've been enjoying your podcast as well.
Thank you.
I like your humility with which you present your material and the well-rounded way in which you approach it as well.
Thank you.
And the time you put into it. It's really nice too. Okay, so my website is noahfrere.com. It's just my name. It couldn't be easier. noahfrere.com. Mm-hmm. That's really the best way to find me. I do have a Facebook page and Instagram, but I guess I could mention the Instagram. The handle is @astronomologer. It's harder to say and spell, but it's astronomologer. But if you can't find that, noahfrere.com. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And am I doing other things? Like I said, I'm studying Prometheus also, who is super awesome and has a lot to offer, just as much as any of the other chart points, in my opinion. And I don't know, I guess I'm not only an astrologer, I teach astronomy at a local college, which is really rewarding. I mean, I did go to school for it, so it's nice to actually do that also. And I love, trying to present the beauty of the night sky to these college kids who don't know much of anything about it because they live in the city with light pollution, right? Light pollution is a terrible thing. And it's just the worst. So I don't talk astrology in the college setting at all, like zero. And I've made peace with that. But I do try to present the astronomy in such a way where there is some kind of deeper significance than just the science behind it. And so that's my way of trying to integrate astronomy and astrology and heal this divide, this Cartesian split, where the sciences and the spiritual crafts have become so disenamored of each other. So I like to also let astronomy guide my astrology in certain respects. I didn't do that today here, but eventually I'd like to learn all there is about the asteroid Persephone and see how that correlates to the archetypal meanings, for instance.
Yeah, for sure. When you're ready, when you have the info, I would love to have you on and talk about the astronomy of it so we can connect it too. Obviously, I will put everything in the comments, all your website information and your link to your Instagram. So if people want to book a reading with you or if they just want to chat with you, and they can flick you a message, I suppose.
Cool.
Which is great. It's just awesome that we have these social media platforms.
It is.
Yeah. All right. Well, I suppose that's it for today.
And will you
And
tell us your Persephone story next time
I thought you were gonna ask. I can tell you.
or now?
It's in Scorpio. It's in Scorpio.
You have a no way. That's so cool because we
Yes,
talked about that so much. Can you tell
we
us
did.
like
I'm
a
so grateful.
can you tell us your
I can tell
story?
you I can tell you a little bit. I'm not quite ready to talk about too much of it yet, but I definitely had difficulty growing up with my mother. And I think we're fine. I'm trying to find a way where we're both comfortable with our communication. But it's definitely been very scorpionic. I do have some stories that I eventually might tell just because my mother is still around and she's alive and she's well. Like I don't know how much I want to share and I don't want to disrespect her. I do love her very
Sure.
much. I do
Mhm.
appreciate her and I'm grateful for all the experiences that I had. Um, but everything that we talked about in terms of Persephone and Scorpio, I can definitely relate to. What's even more interesting to me is that it's in my 10th house. And I relate this podcast to my 10th house. And
Sure.
this is one of the first interviews we're doing. So I thought this is fascinating.
Perfect.
Because this wasn't my idea. It was definitely it was all coming from you to do Persephone. It was like, okay, this is cool. I guess we're doing that.
Yeah, let your
Um,
Persephone out of the closet.
exactly. Finally, she's been in the closet for too long.
And Scorpio,
But
gosh
yeah,
sakes. Well, I would love to
yeah,
hear that story. Oh my gosh.
yeah. I'll meditate on that. I'll definitely I'll share some.
And quickly,
So
where's your Mars?
my Mars is in Scorpio as well.
Oh, okay. Now we're getting really
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it is. It kind of created this really interesting stellium, and I was brave enough to message Chris Brennan about it once because he doesn't do readings anymore. And I was like, does this count still as a stellium? Because my sun is in Sagittarius, but all of this is in Scorpio. He's like, well, actually it would because the sun is in the first degree. So I guess you would call it a stellium.
Close enough.
So
Yeah.
it's the sun, Mars, Pluto, Palacephine, and Persephone.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All within like
Thank you,
10
I
degrees or
suppose.
something.
Yeah, it's definitely been a challenge, but I think it will be rewarding in the future for me.
See, Pallas Athena is like strategic wisdom. She's
Hmm.
really smart. So she can, bring also, I would say, guidance and like insight into your Persephone experience.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I would share one really quick before we go because I feel like I don't want to leave you without a story about because we did talk about Persephone and Scorpio for so long. What I did mention is water signs using plant medicines to heal these wounds. And there was one story where I had a shamanic journey with plant medicine called ayahuasca. It was all in the country where it was all very legal, just to make sure otherwise people don't know. They ask you questions.
Yeah.
Where can you get it? It's like, I can't get it for you. You just have to go to places where you can get it, and you can get it from a shaman. You have to be very, very careful. You have to be very, very discerning. Like, just
Mhm.
be sure you know what you're doing. But what came out of it was a spider. And I was terrified of spiders. And I saw two spiders eat me, like just devour me in that plant medicine shamanic journey experience. And then I learned later that spiders actually represent the mother archetype as well as the feminine and as creative. So it was unlocking that wound. The healing of that wound has helped me to unlock the creativity within me that I was really holding back
Mm.
because of that. So it was very scorpionic because Scorpio is
Wow.
also spider as well.
Right. Wow,
But
that's
yeah.
awesome. I did not know that spiders represented a mother. That's so interesting.
Mm-hmm. In some cultures,
Beautiful.
they do.
So that was a healing process that played into your Persephone role, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I believe so. So part of my Persephone role is the idea that I need to be married.
Mm.
Part of it comes from the culture, but also from the female lineage in our family. And that experience has helped me realize that I'm not really like it's not something that I necessarily want to do. It's not a goal of life that I have. My goal in life is to be a creative. That's something that I love doing. Marriage is something that's additional and it's nice, but it's not something that I need to strive for. Right. Where that was really encouraged, I suppose I should say.
This is so interesting because we didn't talk about Persephone in the houses, but here's a perfect example of the various forms Persephone can take. Persephone in the 10th house for you, instead of you being abducted by some guy, like the idea of marriage has abducted you, which is a 10th house thing. It's like public. Everyone knows who your husband or wife is. And so Persephone then is this wound relating to like what you don't, what it's even hard to like put into words, but you see what I'm saying? Like these ideas where you feel like you should get married is it's like Persephone wants to be married in the 10th house. She wants to be public, but you, it's like I'm doing a terrible job.
No, you're doing great.
She is, I guess what I said earlier, she's that ideal of marriage is being abducted rather than you being abducted. See what I mean?
Yes, I'm sure. No, exactly. That's why I said you're explaining it perfectly, because that's exactly what happened. And my partners all had Pluto over my Persephone because they were early
Scorpios. Pluto and Scorpio.
Pluto and Scorpio, exactly. Whereas my Pluto's later. Yeah.
Okay. And so
I'm at the tail end of it.
Okay, and your husband and wife are together in Scorpio in your 10th house. So it's like they're asked. Pluto's like, come on, wife, let's get married.
Yes, exactly.
And you're like,
but I've got Pluto myself right there. Why do I need your Pluto? Kind of thing.
They're a nice layer. Ooh, I like that. Right.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean,
so many Plutos.
Looking at charts, so many Plutos.
Your Pluto, the other Pluto.
Yeah, it's true. But I think having anything, the other guy's Pluto, usually Scorpio moons too. But I think anything with Scorpio is usually an interesting, fascinating, deep story. So whatever, like you guys haven't, like I know whatever you have in Scorpio is probably.
I have a Scorpio moon.
That's right. That's right.
Second degree.
Yeah, I seem to attract a lot of Scorpio moons in my life. A lot of friends, Scorpio moons. Like, just cool. I feel like I get you guys.
Yeah. I love Scorpio. I also love Sagittarius. I love all the signs. Why not?
I know.
But I do like some more than others.
Exactly. Even in your own chart, you're like, wish that was different. But that's okay. It's what we chose. But anyway,
thanks for sharing that.
No, of course. Thank you for asking. I appreciate that. It's nice to be asked. And I guess we can wrap up here. And I'll link everything down below for you guys in the podcast apps and on YouTube now as well. Thank you, Noah, for that. That was actually thanks to you, because I've also got Chiron and Leo. So I don't actually love putting myself out there. It's something that I'm working on.
I see. Right. Okay.
It's interesting. So it's fun. Anyway. So we can stop the recording.
All right. Thanks. It was so great. Have a good evening or morning.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a morning. Thank you so much, Noah. This is amazing. And you're honestly such a great storyteller. And I think the more you speak, the more you tell these stories, the better you're going to get. And it's going to be so quick for you. Cool. You're going to get better and better at that. So I'm excited to see. I hope you keep doing your YouTube, by the way, because I saw one video. Hope you keep doing. That's great.
That would be good if I could do more.